English translation 886 Contact Wednesday, the 1st of May 2024, 004 hours.
You appear early again, but welcome, dear friend, and also greetings in the early morning hour. Besides, you seem polished to me because I have a few things that need to be discussed.
Greetings to you, dear Edward, my friend. You are making me sore. What is on your mind?
I have got a few things that need to be brought up bit by bit.
Although it is probably repugnant to you, I still have something to mention first, and the one question for you regarding what happened recently. In the meantime, have you also set the record straight in the Zeitzeichen, sign of the times, regarding the sectarianism of this Jedediah Ramnarine, aka Jedi Reach, as was the desire of our committee?
Of course.
Good. Because this has become very important. Because from the teaching of the truth, teaching of the creation energy, teaching of the life, no grasping religions and also no other sectarian beings should arise, which are able to begin to have a worldwide effect on the earth humans that it leads to a delusion of belief. Due to the recent unpleasant events of Jedediah Ramnarine, we have dutifully informed our committee about the machinations of this man, who also calls himself Jedi Reach. He has formed a cult with numerous followers, using all the knowledge gained from the existence of the reports you have made regarding the conversations with us Playaran. He has infamously not only obtained passive membership of the Phi Gu Association, but has also misused the content and knowledge of our conversations, which you have retrieved and written, down verbatim as conversation reports, to unscrupulously and very brazenly use them for his vile benefit with reprehensible lies and nasty fraudulent machinations in order to elevate himself to the position of a cult leader. In his deceitful and lying wise, he places himself high above us, and you, as we have now fathomed, because we have been commissioned by the committee to clarify the sorry incident that has arisen.
I did not know that.
That also happened without your knowledge. We also found out that you have now taken action against Ramnarine's sectarian machinations, and have also expelled him from the Phi Gu Association as a passive member. On the other hand, I would like to say that he has taken flight with very primitive claims of lies, pawn-catching, misdirection, suggestion, with a lowly intelligent and very primitive pretense of false facts, and also with deception. Untruth, nonsense, unreality, and fraud, hoping that the stupid believers who worship him and his other followers of his lying sect will fall for his lying tongues and addiction to lies. More broadly, unfortunately, is to say that even in the early days of contact, back when Asket first came to you, Earth humans were shamelessly telling lies that they were in contact with extraterrestrials. George Adamski was one of the first of these individuals whom you confronted at the time with the help and in the presence of Asket at the Volkshaus in Zurich, whereby you also, this then resulted in.
That was so, but it was not to be discussed further, at least not until...
That is correct, because the whole thing would be disputed, I am sure you think. It also proved to be the case when you and Jacobus and you were both ignored in no wise, as if you were complete foreigners and strangers.
That was the case, yes. We have both spoken about it 2 or 3 times since then. Dr. Sloman, who knew, well, said of him, Dr. Sloman was a friend of Ilse von Jacobi, whom she actually treated like her serf, but who could not detach himself from her. That was a profiteer to whom I should not say too much, because he was twisting everything around so that it was his own merit of his own research work. But even then I did not really care, because ever since I was an adolescent, I never made a point of wanting to be one of those earthlings who believe they have to be at the forefront and in the public eye and are considered special. Like those in power, sportsmen and women, writers and actors, etc., who think that this makes them special. And when I say this, it is my true thinking, my feelings and also my behavior from a young age, when I was just a little adolescent, and my attitude in this regard brought me a lot of suffering and harm. That is why my life did not simply follow a normal course, but it taught me a lot, such as that there are difficult times in life, good and bad incidents and conditions in the course of days and times, but that these can be overcome if you make an effort and do the correct thing. So I have always and continuously given myself the good advice never and never to waste my life. Always to be vigilant, and whatever good and wrong comes against me, never and never to seek revenge and retribution. And so I have taught myself to raise my voice when necessary, to become loud or very loud, or even to shout around when that becomes necessary, but always in such a wise way that anger or rage never arises and comes up in me, and not even when the worst happens.
I heard that myself once, namely that you once spoke to Jacobus about. Besides, I know very clearly that what you just said honestly corresponds to the truth. Because I witnessed for myself how you effectively raised your voice to shout against, but only seconds later spoke to in a normal tone of voice. And honestly, I have never experienced that myself with you before, and I also could not do it myself.
Well, you also do not need to, because I think that is a thing of the past with you guys. But here I have a question from China from...
Question. Plejarin do not enter into legal marriages because they cause problems and lead to bondage. I would follow this advice, but I have not been able to find out why this is so. I do not understand this reasoning. Can you explain it? I think an explanation would lead to more human beings taking this advice. That is what I have to explain. A marriage should be between two human beings by choice, and not forced by authority. Therefore, a man and a woman should also have a marriage together in this wise, which is between both of their own free will and of the right. No matter whether this is bisexual or unisexual, or lesbian or homosexual, because all genders are equal, because they are naturally given. So it is completely wrong to denigrate lesbianism and homosexuality. And Elizabeth answered the question from exceptionally well, and I think that her answer should also be mentioned in our current conversation, and I should read it to you. After which it will also be listed in the contact report, because it is all very instructive and enlightening. So give her to her words.
Answer: in a marriage alliance, if it is to work well and harmoniously, it is very important that both partners behave very respectfully, attentively, and also lovingly in appreciative equality. The appreciative attitude is also maintained absolutely strictly in this wise, even when differences of opinion arise. Differences of opinion are completely normal, as every human being has their own unique personality and can therefore also never agree with another person, but they should never degenerate into arguments. Unfortunately, marriages on Earth are often entered into without much thought or scrutiny. In reality, it always takes time to recognize and get to know the essence of the other human being and future partner. If this is not done, it is predictable that such disagreements will arise in a marriage, that it will no longer be possible to continue living together. In an official marriage, one spouse's claims to ownership of the other often come to light, resulting in unrealizable demands and restrictions for the partner concerned. It also often turns out in an official marriage that one is too sure of the other and therefore unwilling to do good relationship work. In this wise, it is not possible to develop an equal marital partnership that produces positive evolutionary values for both parties. In the case of a marriage that comes about legally through an official marriage ceremony, separation is usually associated with considerable problems, even if this would be the only sensible step to take in the event of a hopeless breakdown of the marriage. This is particularly the case if the official marriage has also produced offspring. An official marriage is a legal obligation, so that it often has to be maintained against all reason. However, this must is not a good prerequisite for an equal and harmonious marital partnership, because in a marriage union, everything should be shared, given and accepted unanimously in a spirit of voluntariness, love and joy, and help and support should be provided in the event of problems and difficulties. In a free marriage, there is no need for an official, legal obligation. There are also no completely unjustified claims of ownership over the partner in a free marriage. This is because each of the spouses voluntarily commits to a good relationship without any official obligation.
That was once Elizabeth's, and it is more than just remarkable how attentive, good and self-thinking she and our FIGU members in general are, and that they are able to reflect what they have learnt, understand, and also explain over all these decades. This also applies to what Bernadette wrote regarding an answer and clarification of the delusion that human beings allegedly remember past lives and their personalities at that time. This may be an absolute rarity as a result, but it happens so rarely that it is not really worth talking about. And why this can happen should not really be explained. Because selfish people, delusional people, believers, and others who want to be something special would immediately start to fantasize and lie and claim that they would fall under such an exception. Therefore, it is wiser to remain silent, and thus not to mention the whole of the absolutely rare possibility, but to read to you what has emerged as a valuable work by Bernadette, namely the following.
Misunderstandings, Misinterpretations, and Assertions by Bernadette Brand, Switzerland.
A fundamental misunderstanding of many interested parties and consumers of the FIGU with regard to creation energy teaching has been from the very beginning that they assume that it is a kind of teaching in automatic evolutionary progress, or that they expect this solely through the imparting of knowledge, through which they believe they can reach higher levels of evolution without also really having to understand or comprehend what is being explained. They simply pray to what they have learnt, that is to say, read, and then expect to evolve by themselves, so to speak, without having to contribute anything further. This attitude is comparable to that of seminar participants who sleep through most of the course or are completely absent-minded and allow themselves to be sprinkled with the speaker's lectures, only to wave a diploma in front of others' noses after the course is over to tell them how much they have learnt. From the experience of seminar leaders, however, it is clear that as a rule, not even 10% of the knowledge imparted is taken away, and even less of it is put into practice. The translation of the German term Lehr into English teaching fits this attitude very well, which completely misses the actual meaning of the German word, but instead exemplifies the consumer attitude of those who want to be taught or simply put in the picture without having to make a real personal contribution. The German term Lehrer has a much deeper meaning than that of Unterricht, namely that of imparting knowledge, training, education, practice, and the personal practical acquisition of knowledge and skills. So the term teaching encompasses anything but a consumer attitude, because teaching requires a high level of interest, effective initiative, and personal effort from human beings, as well as constant practice, because only in this way can the necessary knowledge, skills, and abilities be acquired that fulfill the meaning and purpose of teaching. With regard to the creation energy teaching, this means that those interested in this field have to familiarize themselves completely on their own with those areas of the teaching that are important and relevant to them and their individual way of thinking and living, or in which they are simply interested. He is reliant on thinking about everything and anything that the teaching conveys to him himself and engaging thoroughly with the material. He has to think through everything that is explained to him and check it for correctness and relevance on the basis of his own life and previous experiences. This includes dealing with and exploring the extent to which he can integrate everything into his own life and put it into practice in order to give his own life a positive and progressive, that is to say, evolutionary. Turn. This active exploration of creation energy teaching excludes all belief and requires, first of all, that human beings begin to track down their very own thoughts, recognize them, and trust them more than anything they are told and persuaded to believe. He will have to learn with difficulty, and sometimes also painfully, to distinguish between religious and worldly faith and what shows itself to him as sober and naked fact, that is to say, as truth. First of all, it is of course disillusioning, not very pleasant and often painful when comfortable beliefs and fantasies, ideas, illusions, or imaginations are to be recognized, picked apart, relativized, and pushed aside, behind which a completely different truth is then usually revealed than what was originally assumed. However, it is also the case that with increasing independence of thought, incorruptibility grows, as does inner security and serenity. Burdensome fearfulness disappears, and a growing self-confidence makes life and dealing with the environment easier for human beings. Ultimately, this new thought process, in which people rely completely on their own thinking and no longer allow themselves to be persuaded or fooled, enables them to be truly themselves and truly human beings to the greatest possible extent. The result of the misinterpretation of creation energy teaching and the false assumption that reading also means understanding is, among other things, the tendency of certain interested people, most of whom are also addicted to esoteric nonsense and fanciful, unrealistic worldviews or suffer from the influence of drugs and delusional disorders, to claim that they have reached higher levels of evolution simply by reading creation energy teaching and have therefore far surpassed all other human beings. As proof of their unfounded claims, they then boast about the famous, historically important, and relevant personalities they were in past lives. Of course, these are never just completely normal, unknown, and unspectacular human beings from the common people who did not write history and whose great names are not mentioned in any traditions. The names mentioned are always long-gone personalities who are described as great, according to completely false, unrealistic and illogical earthly standards, even though they did nothing in their lives to bring real peace and freedom to human beings, and to make them recognize higher or loftier values as worth striving for. In fact, and seen in a clear light, these alleged predecessor personalities are mostly conquerors, such as Alexander the Great or other rulers, kings, emperors, and other celebrities who, however, were nothing other than men of power, criminals, despots, criminals against humanity or other failures who had no idea about the fulfillment of creational natural laws and recommendations or about true humanity, but who terrorized and exploited their surroundings and their peoples, enslaved them, and drove them into misery. The reference to such personalities from the past clearly shows whose brainchildren those are who claim such nonsense, for they have fallen prey to a way of thinking that is solely focused on might, worldly greatness, alleged importance, fame and notoriety, and which is brimming with self-aggrandisement and self-adulation, because it is not enough for them to simply be a true human being and a simple pingil, which in their false worldview they already consider a priori to be inferior and despicable. The truth is, however, that human beings who claim to be the successor personality of this or that celebrity of earthly history prove on the one hand that they have not the slightest idea of the laws of resuscitation, that is to say, the laws of revitalizing a completely new personality through creation energy, And on the other hand, they expose themselves as liars and deceivers. The fact is that no human being can ever boast of being the successor personality of this or that predecessor personality, because with death, every personality ends and passes away and simply dissolves. That is to say, the creation energy escapes from the body at death and rejoins the creation energy level, where it utilizes what it has learnt in the material life of the personality in a self-processing way during the time until it revives a material personality and also forms its consciousness. What remains in the creation energy level during the self-processing and waiting time of the creation life. Energy is solely the effective knowledge that the human being, that is to say the personality, has acquired and that has been energetically stored by the creation energy form. Consequently, the personality of every human being is and remains absolutely unique for all times and dimensions for the entire duration of creation's existence. No personality can repeat itself or build on another, because its creation is the result of the current evolutionary state, which is based on the realistic knowledge that the creation energy form has stored during countless human lifetimes. However, the evolutionary state of human beings changes every second, every minute, every hour, every day, every week and continuously, even if only in minimal values. Through everything they learn and experience, what they encounter, what they see, perceive, hear, think, feel and experience or dream. This also changes the personality, which is never static but always dynamic, which excludes the possibility of it ever repeating itself. In a human being's active life, his subconscious picks up knowledge impulses that are released by his creative energy form, and which the consciousness complex of the human being then absorbs and utilizes further, first unconsciously and later consciously, whereby he increases his knowledge and progresses evolutionarily. It makes absolutely no difference to human beings where this knowledge comes from or who acquired and developed it in times long past or only recently. The only important thing is that it is there. If the contact reports or other writings talk about human beings who are alive today being the result of earlier, long-gone personalities, then this is absolutely unique information that is not accessible to any highly evolved human life forms, no matter how advanced or highly evolved, or that could be found out or decoded by them. Because access to the knowledge stores of others, other than their own memory bank, is absolutely denied and impossible for all of them, no matter what high evolutionary level they are at. Such connections can only be decoded and released by the much higher, absolutely neutral, purely creation energetic level Arahat Athasata. At the present, still quite low evolutionary level of Earth humans, it is not even possible to consciously access one's own store of knowledge. Because up to a certain high degree of evolution, direct conscious access to the personality's store of knowledge is absolutely excluded and completely impossible. Consciously accessing knowledge that human beings of earlier times have acquired and that has been stored in their own knowledge store through the common form of creation energy, and fathoming its source is highly demanding and can be so stressful under certain circumstances that the as yet untrained and quasi-underdeveloped consciousness of today's Earth humans would simply collapse, rendering it absolutely useless and inaccessible for further evolutionary steps or developments. However, as the focus is on further development or evolution, human consciousness is protected by creational natural processes until it has the necessary maturity to be able to openly and consciously access certain sources of knowledge without danger and utilize them. Until individual Earth humans have developed to such an extent that they can enable themselves to consciously tap into the knowledge store of their evolutionary lineage and specifically extract knowledge and information from it and utilize it in a new evolutionary way. Countless revivals of new personalities will still be necessary, and thousands, if not millions of years will have to pass into the past. Ergo, even on the basis of these clumsy and rather marginal explanations, it is easy to judge whether the claims of human beings who claim to have been this or that celebrity in previous lives can be correct. The conclusion can only be one thing: such claims are false and simply impossible in terms of truth, regardless of their background. And human beings who make such claims are liars, fraudsters, charlatans, schizophrenics, delusional or drug addicts. But certainly not more highly evolved teachers, gurus, masters, or even those at the end of their evolution, because evolution never ends but continues to progress inexorably and infinitely.
It is really very remarkable how exactly clear and precise Elizabeth and Bernadette have explained the two topics in writing, and really unquestionable to understand what they are explaining.
You can probably say that out loud. That is indeed the case. But while we are at it, see here this letter that writes that in Iraq recently, idiotically, homosexuality has been criminalized, as it is elsewhere, and is even punishable by death, as in Saudi Arabia, in Nigeria and Somalia, then also in Persia, that is to say in Iran and Sudan. The death penalty also applies in the United Arab Emirates, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Mauritania, and Qatar. Heterosexual human beings are naturally homophobic. That is to say, they have a hostility towards those who are sexually different, or have a different sexual orientation due to the influences, that is to say, indoctrination of fellow human beings. Parents, acquaintances, friends, and the media, etc., who are homosexual or lesbian. The human beings who reject homosexuality are therefore homophobic. That is to say, they are homophobes who are hostile to homosexual and lesbian human beings. So they are only those who currently find homosexuality and lesbianism disgusting and imagine the whole thing to be absolutely immoral. And let it be said that when lesbians and homosexuals kiss in public, it is completely normal. The majority of straight people are actually homophobic, and only because they grow up or have grown up in a society that is effectively homophobic all round. So straight people are effectively homophobic, because the world, that is to say humanity, has turned them into straight people with a complete lack of understanding. Switzerland is about 50% hetero-homophobic, that is to say averse and divided towards lesbianism and homosexuality, so that we can speak of a 50-50 judgment. The 50% hetero-homophobes are therefore unfortunately very misguided, because they obviously do not know and have no idea that both homosexuality and lesbianism are normal and innate, and also that in general, human beings are by nature such that they can normally turn to one or the other, and always to the one to which they feel attracted and urged. It is completely morbidly idiotic and criminal to legislate and punish homosexuality and lesbianism, often in a religious sectarian manner, as in countries where it is punishable by death, because homosexuality and lesbianism are innate, as I have already mentioned with regard to marriage in China. These forms of human sexuality are completely normal and natural, and therefore not deviant, not reprehensible, and therefore also not something that should be banned. Basically, I have had this in my knowledge of creation life energy since Nokodemion. It is also something that Schwath often mentioned with regard to human sexuality, that is to say personal sexual imprinting in corresponding conversations. The fact that this is predetermined in every living being in such a way that it acts in such a way that it degenerates behaviorally in one wise or another. In other words, every form of sexuality is naturally predetermined, so that the human being, as well as every animal, creatures and every other life form, carries all forms of sexual behavior, that is to say, forms of sexuality within itself naturally, and exercises them in life. For example, in human beings, as in all other life forms, the various forms of sexual behavior are naturally given, such as the type or form of so-called heterosexuality. Lesbianism, homosexuality, then bisexuality, ipsism, that is to say masturbation, but also zoophilia, that is to say sex with animals and other life forms, which is very common worldwide. I would also like to mention a few of the exceptionally many deviant and completely degenerate forms of sexual behavior that are in no way naturally innate to human beings, but which they acquire and live out in a pathological and deviant way. This is, for example, exhibitionism, exposing the genitals to unsuspecting foreigners, usually by men, then urophilia, preference for urine in a sexual wise, as well as coprophilia, gaining sexual pleasure through human excretion of feces, autonapiophilia, sexual act with baby clothes and nappies, etc., whereby the range of this short selection of deviant sexual practices is, however, very diverse and actually knows no limits.
Such degeneracies are unknown to us, Playaran, but the forms of sexual imprinting of a natural form, as you call it, very much so.
Then there is nothing more to say regarding this topic. Consequently, I still want to bring up this letter question here. Since Mrs. from the Netherlands asks why the contact reports are always provided with a date, which actually indicates a day and a time, which does not correspond to reality if we conduct our conversations time-shifted and also day-shifted, as this was just mentioned once.
I think you can explain that yourself, and I will refrain from answering that.
Aha, chickening out. That is not usually your style.
Contacts only take place at different times and places in order to keep them secret and remain invisible ourselves, because we are not to be detected or sighted in any wise by Earth humans, as our committee expressly instructs. That is all I want to say, because everything that arises in each case you shall.
At least something. Good. Then I will try to make the whole thing clear. Our people here at the center often experience and can testify in various wise ways that I am called by you, such as you calling me on the phone from the office when Eva or I are not in the offices. This is when I am not alone, but with someone in the parlor or in the kitchen having a conversation. This is one way of calling me, whereas otherwise, if I am having a conversation with someone in the office or something, then you will rumble around in Eva's office so that I check and find one of you there. So of course I have to send the person in my office away. One of your favorite things is also to open the front door of Eva's office and then slam it shut, so that I naturally have a look and find one of you outside waiting for me to clear my office again. You chose this wise because I am no longer able to react so well telepathically due to the stroke I suffered. But it also works like this. Well, that is one thing. Then there are the conversations with you, the ones that I then call up and write down. And these are the ones that are time-delayed and location-delayed, because only very few and short ones take place in my office. Because as a rule, everything is done time-delayed and location-delayed, precisely for security reasons, so that someone cannot suddenly and unexpectedly appear and hug you,
That would be for us.
I know that, which is why I always lock the doors to my office and check that no one is hiding in the room, as Simya-se has already instructed me to do. Now, the fact that everything happens in such a wise way that the contact conversations take place days and weeks apart from the office, and therefore at times that were days or weeks in the past. Do you really want me to explain that?
That should be now, yes, because no harm can come from that, but...
Maybe it can also prevent spying, which is what happened back then when Simya-se almost lost her life because of it, and subsequently found the way to postpone the contact conversations and also your other visits in terms of time as well as location. The listening devices secretly installed in my office also became useless as a result, as did his hiding in the empty space of the large piece of furniture where I discovered him, and threw him out, and he then left and never came back.
That is very familiar to me because with Quetzal together...
Yeah, but that does not necessarily need to be publicized because...
Of course not.
Good. Then the following should be said by way of explanation. The contact conversations, of course, correctly take place on the day and at the time of the present, as I also correctly declare and state them. And this is also the case when we go into the times of the past for these days or weeks. Consequently, it does not matter and there is no fraud, because on the day and at the time indicated by me, that is the moment of the conversation, and also when we go back to a day and a time in the past to maintain it. On the other hand, the contacts are also often shifted in location, as you take me to the beam ship or we sit somewhere outside, somewhere far away in the open country, or when we walk around in a forest. However, there is always a connection to my office in such a wise that I can see what is going on in it, and I can even operate the telephone remotely without being present in the office. Your technology allows me to do this because it is far superior to the earthly primitive technology. Unfortunately, there is no solution to the problem of being able to go to Eva's office door when someone rings the bell or even bangs on it, which I can also hear. If I wanted to go to the door, the only option would be for you to take me back to the office and the present time.
You explained everything really well and understandably.
I hope so, because I do not want to revisit the whole thing to explain it again. And you think that was really necessary?
I guess it was, because it was asked about it, whereas there is also nothing to hide. But what I have to talk about now is the following. Even at the time when my daughter Simyase was still personally in contact with you, before the accident occurred due to the carelessness of, and Simyase was no longer able to fulfill her task, it was already apparent, and I will now talk about this in particular, that irresponsible Earth humans maliciously began to spread lies about you, as well as alleged connections with Us Plejaren and terrible deceptions, the authors of which claimed that they were in some wise connected with us. It was even claimed that certain persons were emissaries, or even beings from the Pleiades stars. But we knew this in advance and therefore prevented these lies and deceptions by concealing our true origins and only naming them in a somewhat veiled manner. This resulted in such a way that we first of all had you deliberately and falsely proclaim that we came from the Pleiades stars, which corresponded to the truth and not a lie. This is because we effectively came to Earth from the Pleiades stars, which were our starting point in this cosmos in order to reach Earth. But this has changed since then because we can reach Earth directly from our anchor universe using sonar technology. So it was said by us and proclaimed by you because we knew in advance that deceptive Earth humans would appear and claim to be in direct contact with us Pleiadians, that we would come from the Pleiades stars. This resulted in the lies and deceptions being exposed, which also actually occurred several times in such a way that such claims arose that Earth humans would be in indirect channeling-wise or direct personality-wise, etc. with us. This happened especially in America, also in Canada, but also in Germany.
Yes, and even in Canada, one with a doctorate. In America, through the fraudster from Florida, who traveled the world, scammed a fortune with his lies, and was able to buy a princely title in Germany, together with a woman from Switzerland who believed his lies, a woman from Graubünden. I never took any legal action against any of these liars, not even the slightest, because I always knew that I would not get a chance, that I would always lose, as I had done all my life. So I never did anything, and I never had the slightest chance against lies and other offenses against me anyway, so I always came last. Besides, I am not keen on being on the front line and flaunting myself and being admired, because that is what those who think their likeness is important to flaunt in public should do. For my part, I do not care, but devote myself to my work and only appear there because it is necessary. As it was necessary, for example, when you suggested to me that the film Contact was made by Americans, with Japanese and Mexicans. Unfortunately, I cannot avoid being photographed in private from time to time, but I do my best to avoid it. Well, that is not the actual topic, because there was also the woman from Munich, a fortune-teller, and a few others, such as the man in Geneva with his sect, which he set up and then absconded to France with its believers. Victor and Adela then took legal action against this fraudster and sectarian, while Guido took legal action against the fraudster from Florida. But I had to take the rap, because after all, it was about the cause of my mission. However, the court proceedings were conducted in such a way that my objections and explanations were not accepted and simply shot down, and I was sentenced in such a wise that if I only mentioned the name of the fraudsters, or said that their statements were just lies, I would be punished for it. From Germany, where the man from Florida had established himself as a prince, the court threatened me that I would have to pay a fine of 500 Deutschmarks just for mentioning the name of the fraudster. Adela and Victor paid around 9,000 Deutschmarks for this trial, which I had advised them not to do. In the end, I had to pay a fine of several thousand francs for the fraudster from Geneva, who then emigrated to France and against whom Adela and Victor also initiated a lawsuit. I could not take part in the trial myself because, as in Germany, it was conducted without me. Guido stopped the court case again, which he was conducting privately and together with a lawyer against the fraudster in Munich. But it was only when the lawyer's fees rose to over 30,000 Deutschmarks that Guido stopped the whole thing and listened to me, saying that he should just let the liar lie. In the end, the whole thing led to the FIGU never doing anything to take action against liars and fraudsters who had the audacity to misuse the contact reports, and also to claim that they were in contact with Uplayaren and were themselves Plejaren who had been summoned here or born here on Earth due to special circumstances. And that in all this time our conversations, which Uplayaren and I have, and of which I call up and write down some, are taken and falsified. That is known to you and to me, as is also the fact that the falsifications are used to form groups and to claim their own connections with Uplayaren through lies and deceit. But when I think of everything I have seen and experienced with Svath regarding forgeries, even as a boy I gave up recognizing something as an original when it was presented to me as such. Through Svath I learnt, saw and experienced that the world is being lied to and deceived through and through, because everything and anything has been forged since time immemorial, and there are probably more forgeries of all kinds on the face of the earth than there are true originals. Objects and inventions, paintings, writings, and books have been particularly forged in recent times over the last 1,000 years. Even before antiquity, nothing was safe from forgery, namely that it would have been copied or otherwise falsified and declared as an original or new invention. This has remained the case to this day, and as a result, there are now more counterfeits of all kinds all over the world, including imitations and new inventions of ancient inventions that existed centuries or even millennia ago. However, I will say more about this later, because together with Svath and through my open eyes and the help of Asket, I have seen and experienced so much in this regard that I am not upset that this Ramnarine is now working around in a lying, deceitful and sectarian manner and claims to be in contact with you. What this Ramnarine is doing with his outrageous lies and deceptions is the bottom of the barrel, but I do not think it is worth dealing with it any further. I do want to say something about counterfeiting, which has been rampant in the world since time immemorial, because all around the world there are probably more fakes than originals.
Even in your youth you did not find it worthwhile, as you say, to deal with and oppose the unjust and evil things that were done to you, as a result of which a large number of sect members as well as misses, and as a result, various members of the communal and cantonal authorities, as well as various police officers from the commune and other places, slandered you and also put you in various institutions and prisons and also placed you in foreign placements, as Ha.
Stop, that does not belong there, and I am not going to retrieve it, and I am also not going to write it down.
But everything has been done wrongly and by falsifying the facts, because you rebelled against the sectarianism that misses, which should be said once, so that it is shown what injustice has been done to you and what false and underhand machinations certain. Earth humans are capable of when they suddenly have might as members of the authorities or the police and use it unthinkingly vilely against those they do not.
Do not suit them, as has happened to me.
I think so, yes, and I want what we have just spoken to be recalled and written down by you. There is no point in talking back.
I really do not want that.
We will talk about that later.
I guess that is not necessary because I think I am really not writing down what was said, so I will just leave it out when we retrieve our conversation.
We will talk about that, like I said.
I will be done, but I think that
You will change your mind because...
we probably will not agree on that. But what I want to bring up again now is that the Earthlings just do not want to realize that something has to be done to dilute the CO2 in the atmosphere. At Svath, I learnt that by creating small and large biotopes and greening the land with trees, shrubs, and plants, including many flowers, CO2 is absorbed from the atmosphere and thus relieves it. In particular, there are plants that ignorant idiots even in the government, as well as organizations, are banning for cultivation because they are currently not native to our areas. However, the fact that these plants were once here due to the climate and will definitely be here again in the future is not taken into consideration at all. And the fact that many of these plants are very valuable and not only thrive here, but are also great absorbers of CO2 and thus help to relieve the atmosphere of this poisonous gas, is not known to the idiots of the so-called neophyte enemies, nor apparently to the Federal Council in Switzerland, which decided at a meeting in Bern on the 1st of March 2024 to ban them. At a meeting in Bern on the 1st of March 2024, it decided that from the 1st of September 2024, for example, certain neophytes, that is to say alien plants, may no longer be placed on the market. That is to say, as an idiotic consequence of a corresponding petition by those idiotic neophyte enemies who mendaciously and incomprehensibly claim that these and those neophytes are invasive and therefore rampant. The Federal Council is thus implementing a parliamentary proposal, although its members clearly understand nothing about the plant world, its effects and its necessity, just as many so-called experts with false views, assumptions, and opinions also do not. The morbidly lowly intelligent neophyte haters stubbornly claim that certain neophytes are invasive plants, when in fact they are not, such as the tree of heaven, bluebell tree, butterfly bush, and cherry laurel, which absorb a particularly large amount of CO2 from the atmosphere and also do a lot in this respect, as do other large shrubs and bushes. As a rule, these are solitary plants that have been thriving here for a long time, even for centuries, and do not spread to such an extent that they are invasive, that is to say, proliferating. However, when they produce young, this only happens naturally through their seeds, which fall to the ground, are carried away by the wind or by birds and wild animals and fall back to earth somewhere. And so it also happens without exception with the seed dispersal of native plants of all genus and species, whereby it also always remains questionable whether a seed falling directly from the plant to the ground or carried away by the wind, or a seed carried away by any birds or animals, etc., can germinate and become a plant. This is because seeds can only germinate and develop if there is enough oxygen, and also if the soil is not too cold and there is no lack of water, so that germination is not prevented and photosynthesis can take place. In addition, it is absolutely essential and important that the seed is placed in the soil layer, which should not be thicker than the diameter, that is to say, the size of the seed. Nature's rule of thumb is that every seed, as a rule, if it manages to do so on its own without the help of human beings, is easily covered with fine earth. But this is often not possible, and therefore the seed spoils over time because, like everything and anything, it only has a limited lifespan and therefore remains germinable. Now, invasive neophytes should of course not displace the native flora in Switzerland and cause any damage to biodiversity. But only very, very few neophytes are really invasive and therefore proliferating, harmful to the health of human beings and animals, or can cause economic damage. The occurrence and spread of such plants should of course be prevented, but there are really only very, very few of them, so they also cause no harm if their spread is monitored and prevented. The fact that alleged alien neophytes are currently contributing to the decline in biodiversity worldwide is simply a blasphemous lie told by nature bunglers who know absolutely nothing about plants and nature. The truth is that there are really only very, very few neophyte plants that are effectively invasive, and therefore overgrowing and also displacing native plants. Those who are hostile to neophytes, who think they are clever and behave in a delusional, know-it-all manner, really have no knowledge of the behavior of nature, because their delusion prevents them from really recognizing and understanding the workings of nature and its laws. These know-it-alls with all their idiotic delusions tamper with nature without any real knowledge of its natural laws, just as other delusional people do with other things, thereby not only hindering and changing the normal course of events, but even making a mess of them. Unfortunately, those who are hostile to neophytes are blind to reality in their delusion, even if they are sitting in the federal palace in Bern, dancing and deciding to the tune of the delusional. The pathological and delusional members of this species of lunatics put everything into one hat and can spread their evil and thoughtless lies and fraudulent claims as a result of the firmly entrenched beliefs of their fellow human beings, so that the misleading, stupid, evil, idiotic, and truth-distorting delusional lies and delusional frauds take hold to such an extent that many unsuspecting blind believers fall for them and take everything at face value. The idiocy of all this hostility towards neophytes and the know-it-all attitude towards what is really good for nature and its prosperity and correct for the existence of the entire plant world, not only the entire flora, but also the fauna, which is also part of it, should finally be taught to the Earthlings so that they can finally do the right thing and not end up making a complete mess of all life. Unfortunately, the evil in this regard has spread and become so delusional that it has even found its way into the authorities, so that they, together with foresters and gardeners, who have been misled as experts, and the police have set out to take up residence and stop what is being done to make everything correct. So those who do not have the slightest idea of either tooting or blowing the whistle, who are even experts, who in their delusion believe that they are, or at least call themselves such, but understand nothing at all about the whole of nature and its laws, have the audacity to show off, blag and issue instructions because they feel great and powerful, and think that in their low intelligence they have the right to issue idiotic instructions, prohibitions, or orders under threat. And that is exactly what I have been thinking about for a long time, whether I should openly say and mention.
That you do not speak openly about it, at least not yet.
You are certainly right about that, but here I still want to show you this letter, which is regarding the translations of the books, etc., into other languages. Please, what is written here should actually but read here, please.
This is really a problem, which is why I think...
Yes, Bernadette and I also think that, which is that the committee is responsible for that.
You anticipated what I was going to say.
Exactly. That is why I interjected and said that Bernadette and I are of the same opinion. So it would be good if you could get a decision from the committee. We think that...
I think that would be correct, and I will endeavor to raise that with the committee today and report back to you immediately afterwards what the decision is. Someone from the station can let you know what the outcome will be, so you will know tomorrow.
That is good. Then I can pass it on to Bernadette straight away. But what I think is very important now is that you open your sewing box and pull out some needles with threads worth knowing, through which something from the Play Yaren story can be sewn and revealed. That, I think, would be much more important than what I have just said. So it would certainly be appropriate for once to explain why you call yourselves Play Yaren, as well as many other things, so that something can be read in the contact reports in this regard for once.
Yes, I can do that, but that is why I insist that we still have all sorts of things to discuss afterwards after our official conversation regarding what we talked about. And what you said about it is partly known to me because my daughter Simyase told me some of it. To clarify, however, is that we called the Pleiades because the breakthrough from our anchor universe to this Dern universe is located not far from the Pleiades stars that, you know, more precisely at a distance of almost 400 light-years beyond the Pleiades stars, which are not very persistent in themselves. And the reason why we call ourselves Play Yaren is because the Pleiades system in this Dern universe is the closest solar system for us, which we are aiming at for the transition into this Dern universe. whose name we have known from time immemorial from the Earth humans, and have adopted for our system, which our ancestors only called Plei-Yarren around 2,000 years ago with a slight modification. Our homeworld, that is to say our planet, has only been called Era for around 52,000 years because our ancestors chose this name when real and general peace was established among all peoples across the planet and also spread across our entire Federation, which had come about much earlier through wars and hostilities. However, before the real peace came, which has now prevailed for well over 5 decades, our very early Plei-Yarren ancestors, who at that time called themselves Siren, as Era was also called at that time, some groups of them found their way to Earth 25 million years ago. And this happened because they were following a large satellite that moved out of a system and entered this Dern universe from our anchor universe through a completely natural dimensional passage. You once called it a dimensional gate. This satellite arrived in the SOL system after a very long time, as it settled on Earth as a moon and has been orbiting the planet ever since, but gradually moving away from it. Some groups of enthusiasts from the former inhabitants of Siren later came to Earth, which supported life and offered very good living conditions and set up domiciles here. But over time lost all technology and connections with Siren, and thus, of course, also with the Ankar universe. As a result, they went wild and died out. Very long millions of years later, Sironian groups found their way to Earth again, and these, as well as their descendants, were already required to keep away from the not harmless foreigners, whose distant descendants are still on Earth today, according to predetermined directives. The same rule applied to early humans, as it is also upheld today by strict directives. The foreigners, whom we do not want to call by name because that is not our job, and we are also not supposed to interfere according to the directives, are not as harmless as all the loyal-hearted and blue-eyed Earth humans, as you sometimes say, believe, who too readily and trust blindly only want to recognize all the good things and are therefore not averse to a connection with the foreigners without hesitation. Even for our early ancestors, it was absolutely and strictly forbidden to make contact with any beings of a self-thinking and rational nature in foreign universes and worlds. This was always forbidden by the directives that have been given and handed down for millions of years to prevent the intrusion of any foreign beings from foreign universes into our Ankar universe. The fact that foreign universes exist, apart from our own creation, was already calculated many millions of years ago by the sciences, so it was clear that there must certainly be foreign universes outside the realms of our creation. However, we have been unable to enter such foreign creation universes for millions of years, so it was only a few years ago that we, together with the Sonayers, succeeded in breaking into a foreign creation universe and entering it, which is now being researched and shows that it has a lot of life. However, we are still strictly required to act in accordance with our directives and to adhere to them so that foreign influences cannot have a negative, malignant effect, such as acts of war, etc., which have been prevalent in our world for millions of years. What also occurred over the course of millions of years was that the Siren emigrants kept a low profile on Earth and never made themselves recognizable. And so they also remained unrecognized and thus also undetected by the foreigners who also came to Earth in the meantime. The foreigners, who came from various cosmic regions of this Dern universe and are also traveling there today, have no knowledge of us because their technology, as futuristic as it may seem to Earth humans, is far inferior to ours, so they are also unable to locate us. Furthermore, it is still the case today that we strictly adhere to the directives and never make contact with foreigners or Earth humans and are very careful not to reveal or even show them the way to our Ankar universe. An attempt was once made to make contact with the Earth humans, but you would have had to act as a middleman between us and America because we would not have appeared ourselves. But this attempt failed miserably because America's leaders made demands on us Playaran that were so domineering, selfishly power-mad, and unacceptable to us that we canceled the attempt. Well, the later generations of Sidon settlers on Earth either returned to Sidon in the following period and then even later to Era, or they died due to old age. The last Playaran person was a woman who wanted to return to Era in 1193, but died here on Earth, so that no more Playaran have settled on Earth and lived here since then. Apart from us, there are now no Playaran resident on Earth, but there are only a small number of us and we only carry out observation tasks and maintain absolutely no wise connections with Earth humans, and also do not interfere in any way in the affairs and politics, etc., of Earth civilizations or provide any help. This was still the case at the time of my father Svath, but strictly limited to individual Earth people who also lived in times of the past. It was also similar with Askit, but mainly also only in the way it was with my father, although as a result of you it was necessary for Askit, who came from the sister universe, that is to say from the Dal universe, and looked after you, to have brief encounters with some Earth humans of the present. Hans Meyerhofer and Wendell Stevens were included in the connection with her because this was done with the permission of the committee, which even wanted these contacts, but which had to be kept secret. Care was always taken to ensure that both the Earth humans and the foreigners were never even aware of anything. All that I have explained to you and mentioned from earlier times is known to me from the Playaran history and from the annals of my father Svath, who kept very long and accurate written records of the events and history of events on Earth and in connection with you. And the fact that he cultivated contacts with Earth humans, which was specially permitted to him by our committee in his time, and that you, as an Earthborn, are in permanent contact with us and can fulfill your mission, is based on the fact that we have been instructed that your creation life energy form is the same one that fulfilled and fulfills the mission of the Nokodemion, which has already lasted for 9 billion years. It is therefore to be explained that we are instructed by the directives to remain among ourselves and not to enter into any connections with other human beings. Also not with Earth humans and beings from other universes. This clearly means that neither any of us Playaran, nor any human beings, such as Asina, nor human beings from our Federation or even from our Anchor universe would make contact with Earth humans, because this would contravene our directives. This was already the case when we were still waging cosmic wars, and it is even more true now that we are truly at peace, Federation-wide. Here on Earth, too, connections are therefore to be strictly avoided, so that the Earth humans, who for us are foreign as well as unreasonable and violent beings, could not find the passage from this Dern universe into our Ankar universe and bring renewed wars of conquest, which have prevailed again and again for millions of years in large areas of the Ankar universe cosmos, but were finally ended and settled more than 52,000 years ago, so that true peace has prevailed ever since. It would therefore be neither good nor of any advantage if the foreigners, who really cannot be considered harmless, and also the unpeaceful Earth humans could somehow find their way into our Anchor universe. Earth humans in particular are fully orientated towards violence, which they try to cover up outwardly and present themselves as seemingly peaceful. But when they get into corresponding situations, their true attitude breaks through, as a result of which their violence, their falsehood, their vengeful behavior, and their desire for retribution, including murder, uncontrollably assert themselves. This becomes frighteningly clear through armies and militaries, which you describe as murderous organizations, which basically corresponds to correctness because
their trade is nothing other than senselessly murdering, destroying and massacring, raping, torturing and committing war crimes, as I saw with Quetzal and Bermunda. For example, when Israeli military shot the consistently sick in their beds in a hospital, even though these sick people in the beds did not even have weapons or could do or say anything hostile. I saw similar things as a boy together with Svath, when the Nazis were on a murderous and war criminal rampage. And what Bermunda, Quetzal and I saw in the Middle East was no longer just war, but a degenerate massacre, for which Netanyahu is as responsible as Zelensky in Ukraine and also Putin in Russia, although we did not observe and see war crimes to the same extent in Russia as we did in Ukraine and the Middle East. Jose also confirmed the horrors in the hospital that I just mentioned by sending me a newspaper article, which I am not supposed to publish publicly, but which confirms what we saw with our own eyes. As I said, we also saw other war crimes in Ukraine when Bermunda, Quetzal, and I were there. We saw how adolescent girls, as well as young and older women, were raped and then shot or stabbed, but also how prisoners who were first cruelly tortured and beaten, then shot or murdered with knives, sometimes several at a time, were then buried in mass graves, as I had already seen in the last Nazi World War together with Svath. With this, I think there is something to be said. The hammer of today's war in Ukraine is that the idiotic rulers of almost 50 countries are waging a strange world war, the like of which has never been seen before. This peculiar world war can only be waged because the Nazi-minded people in the German government, which of course excludes all the righteous members of the government, such as the Russophobic Strack Zimmermann, whose name, attitude, and open-mindedness are well known, and whom I am therefore deliberately naming, are really Nazis in the German government and are doing evil work. And this war can also only be waged because weapons, ammunition, and money for the war in Ukraine are being supplied completely irresponsibly. The supplier countries are participating completely irresponsibly in the war, which is thus a strange world war and is going on and on. When it comes to the supply of weapons, ammunition, and money, etc., Germany, with America behind it, is leading the warmongering Nazi rabble of the 50 or so pro-Zelensky countries in a warmongering manner, fundamentally controlled by hegemonist America, which wants to make a pig of Russia at all costs and cash in on it as a satellite. All the idiotic, criminal, and irresponsible rulers and the masses of consenting supporters in those countries who supply arms and ammunition to the warmongering Zelensky begging for it, resulting in murder, suffering, misery, and destruction in mass, are to blame for this war going on and on. If all the lowly intelligent idiots, criminals and partisans of those in power, as well as those parts of the population that are also in favor of this war and equally addicted to low intelligence, idiocy, stupidity, and partisanship did not supply weapons, ammunition, and money for the war to the war addict Zelensky, but instead, as they should have done, remained completely neutral and not partisan, then the war would have been over shortly after it began, meaning that it would never have caused so many deaths, rape, destruction, misery, hardship, and suffering on both sides. This war, which basically came about through the hegemonic behavior and boundless irresponsibility of America and the eastward expansion of the murderous organization NATO, and was triggered by Russia, that is to say, the war, which was basically brought about by the hegemonic behavior and boundless irresponsibility of America, and the eastward expansionism of the murderous NATO organization, and was triggered by Russia and Putin's orders who, of course, cannot be defended in any wise as the author and leader of the war, would have been over and done with long ago if it were not for the partisan, irresponsible, completely idiotic, unscrupulous rulers and similarly predisposed useless elements from the populations of around 50 countries, would have delivered and would continue to deliver their evil and loudly affirmative war howls for insane and absolutely deadly vast quantities of arms deliveries, ammunition deliveries, and money to the warmonger Zelensky, who is begging for it worldwide and outrageously. But the sick irresponsibility of the dirty elements of the governments and supporters from the nations supplying weapons, ammunition, and money show a Nazi attitude and a Nazi behavior that is in no wise inferior to the Nazis in the last World War from 1939 to 1945. Unfortunately, this is also the case here in Switzerland, as dirty government elements as well as traitors to the country and their supporters among the people are not only making a mockery of Switzerland's neutrality by adopting sanctions from the EU dictatorship, which are then enacted in a biased manner against Russia, This, as well as money flowing to Ukraine and thus also to Zelensky. Of course, this does not want to be heard by the guilty, especially not by the rulers addressed, which means that the righteous politicians are not addressed and are not guilty. But consequently, when I speak openly and also spread these facts on the internet, I must also reckon with which lousy and dirty traitors to the country are sitting in government and are left scot-free, although they, as those born long after the World War from 1939 to 1945, criminally make a mess of our good national neutrality, which has saved our free country from an attack by the Nazis. And if I am to be held accountable for telling the truth, then this can only be by traitors to the country and their advocates who feel attacked by me, because here in Switzerland too the saying goes, when the dog bites, it barks. And that a dog will not bite if it barks is just a lie, as our Hannibal proved, who barked vigorously on his chain, backing away until the chain was long enough, then he went after people and bit them. 52 persons experienced this before the dog had to be put down as a result of a nasty and painful and incurable ailment. Now in the Middle East there is also murder upon murder, massacre upon massacre, rape upon rape, and destruction upon destruction, etc., causing misery and suffering. But here it is not Putin and Zelensky, but the murderer groups of Hamas and their leaders, as well as the murderer military of Israel, which is under the command of the completely unscrupulous mass murderer Netanyahu, who is striving for genocide in a manner criminal to humanity, and this again, how could it be otherwise, under the protection of hegemonistic America? But here the world is closing its eyes and blocking its conscience, just as it is doing in Ukraine. On the one hand, because one side or the other is sided with and cherished, and no neutrality is cultivated, and especially because America is behind all injustice with armed force, but also with its secret services, which are not afraid to insidiously murder those who dare to speak the truth openly. Therefore, the fear of this is so rampant in many human beings around the world that many turn tail like dogs, cower, remain silent, and do not dare to tell the truth, but instead deny themselves and hypocritically pretend to be America-friendly.
INFS Berber, Wednesday, the 24th of April, 2024.
Kill me. Do not make me suffer, desperately pleads a badly injured soldier at the front. Copyright NHK.
Horror video from the Ukraine front belongs in the public domain as P. Gasche and the 24th of April, 2024 dead, injured, lifelong trauma, life and survival in trenches, the real thing use of drones. A documentary. On the Ukrainian side of the front, Ukrainian soldiers documented their fate themselves with smartphones. The Foreign Service of the Japanese public broadcaster NHK has compiled and published the documentation. The work of journalists on the front is subject to strict censorship. Their recordings and interviewees are controlled. The media mainly report on arms deliveries and show pictures of destroyed houses and infrastructure. The public is rarely confronted with the immeasurable suffering of the fighters at the front. The suppliers of heavy weapons and ammunition reject a ceasefire that would allow Russia to keep Crimea and the Donbass for the time being and guarantee security and peace for the rest of Ukraine without joining NATO. Their argument, Russia would seize the first opportunity to occupy the whole of Ukraine after all. And such a ceasefire would seriously threaten the freedom and security of Western Europe. However, if Putin was really only interested in keeping NATO and NATO missiles away from the Russian border and keeping the more pro-Russian populations of Crimea and the eastern Donbass in the Russian Federation, things would look different. Then a ceasefire would avoid tens of thousands more dead, even more injured, widows, orphans, and even more misery due to destroyed infrastructure on both sides. War is the worst thing that can happen to soldiers on the front line and to populations. This is impressively demonstrated by the documentation of Ukrainian soldiers.
The war recorded by smartphones, a Ukrainian soldier at the front, copyright NHK.
Unfortunately, none of this can be changed, because the immense masses of Earth humans are not willing to detach themselves from evil in their deep mindset and finally turn away from religious and sectarian beliefs, free themselves from them and turn towards free and independent thinking, as well as thus also towards becoming true humanity. The falseness of all religions and sects does not allow Earth humans to free themselves from belief in them. Their falsifications regarding all the lies and many deceptions are so anchored in the believer's faith that they effectively languish piously in evil fear, bound and imprisoned in their lives under the delusion that the imaginary God would punish them with suffering, pain, and illness, and even banish them to hellfire to the equally imaginary Satan if they did not devote themselves sacrificially, devotedly, and eagerly to the delusional faith.
I know that, because Svoth already explained that to me and told me a lot about what and how blazing fear and terror has been hammered into Earthlings with faith since time immemorial. And this has happened and is also happening today, as it will also continue to do for a very long time. When I think in particular of sectarian Persia with its mullahs, I feel a correct dread because they are murderous fanatics in Persia, or Iran, as it has been called since the 1930s. Mullahs are what I want to explain to you, Shiite clerics, Friday preachers, prayer leaders, as well as talib, that is to say students, religious legal scholars of enormous importance, who have completed theological training and are called mujtahids. In 1979, when Ayatollah Khomeini triggered the revolution in Persia from exile in France, and then, when he returned from France, overthrew Emperor Reza Pahlavi, and the country became very strictly mullah sectarian. That is when the completely degenerate religious mania began, and since then everything evil has been happening with it. From torture, massacres, lynching, rape, and stoning, etc., as is also happening in Saudi Arabia and Afghanistan in particular, but which is largely concealed from the outside world. In my life, I have seen a lot of harm caused by the fear of religious believers, such as human beings being bestially massacred, women and children sexually violated, lynched, or otherwise murdered as a result of their religious mania, that is to say, delusion. But that is only a small side of evil, because I also know that not only is there more than a great deal of falsification and lies about religions and sects, which is being added to almost daily, but that countless chronicles, history, wars, the arts, especially painting, as well as countless other things are also being falsified. In particular, food has been counterfeited for a long time, sometimes with toxic substances that are pathogenic for human beings, and many other things are also based on counterfeiting, which effectively defrauds billions every year, namely around 300 billion francs worldwide, as recently calculated by Quetzal, who deals with these things and informs the entire planetary population on Era about what is going on Earth, because this task is incumbent on him. Well, what has been handed down and written in chronicles in regarding the many different events in world history over the last 2,500 years is full of falsifications. Much was simply invented in a fanciful way, or it was written down as effectively genuine and true from hearsay, completely uncontrolled and without any precise research. In addition, much was cobbled together with free additions. Just as much conjecture was recorded in writing as chronicles and truth by various scribes, which today is considered true world history, although everything or much is lies and fraud. However, this does not want to be recognized and accepted as truth by those earthlings who have devoured the written records that have been circulating since time immemorial and who carelessly and falsely assess everything as genuine. But the fact that forgeries, lies and fraud have been fabricated on a large scale since ancient times, especially for around 2,500 years, and that the knowledge of world history has been controlled in this wise, is something that earthlings neither want to know nor accept, especially those earthlings who deal with the subject of past history, and put forward their theses, views, confused opinions, and assertions to the point that the rinds are cracking. In the last 2,500 years in particular, forgeries, lies, and deceit have been spread in writing to such an extent that today everything is regarded as truthful tradition. Although in fact everything and everything contains more or less, which of course the experts, who are so rational that they vehemently deny the effective truth, do not want to know about. It simply must not be true that the effective truth is truth, because this cuts off the dignity of the knowers of science from the experts. They are the ones who know everything better, and therefore all their teeth break out when the opposite of their assumptions, presumptions, and opinions can be proven. This occurs particularly with regard to alleged religious artifacts, especially in Christianity, as the alleged Shroud of Death is bandied about, which...
Exactly. It is just a supposed Shroud of Death because truthfully there never was one, as we know, because we have investigated everything very thoroughly and found that one was never used. On the contrary, 47 such allegedly genuine shrouds have been fabricated over the last 2,000 years using various methods, of which only 4 still exist today, of which only the existence of one is known, namely the large cloth made of flax known as the Shroud of Turin, in which Emmanuel is said to have been wrapped. This is just as much a forgery as the 3 others that still exist and are secretly. However, you should not mention this openly, because these alleged relics, which really all only correspond to forgeries, are not the only ones. Because just like these alleged crucifixion nails, holy nappies, pieces of wood from the alleged crucifixion cross, as well as secretly even splinters of fingernails and toenails, as well as hair and blood residues, etc., are hoarded as relics. Were hoarded as relics, all of which corresponded to nothing more than falsifications. As we have found out through very precise investigations, not a single piece of evidence was recovered that would point to the crucifixion of Emmanuel or to his personality. The lance that is said to have been thrust into Emmanuel's loin is also circulating as a relic in Christianity. This also applies to the alleged chalice from which Emmanuel is said to have drunk wine, which he truly despised, fancifully said, like the devil the incense, according to a proverb of the Christian faith, which probably fits here. But this nonsense of drinking wine, Emmanuel only drank water, is not inferior to all the other religions and their sects. For these also hoard such fraudulent utensils, which they mendaciously claim to trace back to the founder of their religion. Furthermore, in all religions and their sects, believers have to perform ridiculous short or long prayers and adorations to their imaginary deities, as well as observe rules and perform ritual movements and certain physical ablutions, etc., all of which were invented by scribblers after the demise of the originators of the religions and their sects. This, as well as many legends, for example, fairy tales by the brothers Grimm, who only compiled fairy tales from all ancient times but never wrote their own. But crazy stories, legends, and even many historical reports, etc., are also full of forgeries that are foisted on interested human beings as truth, who believe the hoax and experts claim that everything corresponds to the truth. But the truth is that the world, that is to say, human beings, simply want to be lied to and deceived.
Exactly. That is what I was talking about in the kitchen. Namely that for 2,500 years, and especially during the last 1,000 years, there has been a strikingly high incidence of lies and deceit, especially with regard to forgeries of all kinds, whereby the forging of chronicles, histories, books, paintings, and much else is characterized. The unwritten recommendation to always tell and write down the truth and nothing but the truth has been disregarded since ancient times, and especially for the last 1,000 years. As a result, chronicles and other traditions, originals of paintings and books, etc., have been lied about, cheated, falsified, and deceived to such an extent that all the beams should have broken, and that these should break even more so today, especially with regard to the public media, newspapers, magazines, television, and the internet, etc., which, with very few exceptions, mislead the public so mendaciously and maliciously and deliberately fraudulently with untruths and primitive false reports, unfortunately happens every day. And it is not uncommon for this to be done on behalf of governments, although the people are unable to determine what is truth, fiction, lies, and deception. This has been the case since time immemorial, especially since the last 1,000 years, during which everything has become more and more modernized and advanced methods of falsification have constantly emerged. Even before antiquity, many unbelievable forgeries were produced. But from then on, more and more forgeries were made, for example by having various national sculptors chisel Egyptian statues that had been stolen from Roman emperors in Egypt and used as models. These were then declared to be true and genuine Egyptian works of art, and thus deliberately deceived their own people and the world. In the same way that Darwin also acted as a fraudster, filing bones, which is also unknown to the world, in order to prove his theories that human beings are descended from apes, as he claimed and falsified. But the fact that human beings are not descended from apes, but are a separate species, will take a long time to be truly recognized. What Darwin tinkered with fits in with the same lying claim of those scientists who insist that human beings originated in South Africa and colonized the world from there. This lying claim is like the falsification of time about 1,300 years ago, and again about 1,500 years ago by a monk called Exus or Exegus or something, under the patronage of a pope who I think was called John. This once said, as many prints by Albrecht Dürer and many works by other artists were forged, and today many forged works that are considered genuine are in circulation, or are hoarded as genuine and even hang in museums. This is how the world's readership is being led around by the nose with regard to Karl May's books and how his false autobiography is a lousy and fraudulent forgery, and how he has led his readership around by the nose. But the May fans of his time were just as unaware of this as few, if any, May book readers today. The fact is that Karl May did not speak 40 languages, command almost 40,000 Apache Indians, or ever traveled to America in his adolescence. But there were also the Knights Templar, the Templars, as they are simply called, because before the earliest beginnings of Christianity, there were some fanatical loners who thought up and invented the tale of the chalice from which Emmanuel is said to have drunk. Although there was never a chalice involved, only small bowls were used. And Emmanuel never drank wine, only water. The fact that everything was invented a very long time before Christianity proper began, and therefore long before the Knights Templar were founded around 1120, and the false stories about Emmanuel and Mary were adopted by the Knights Templar, from which they made clay cups in masses, this is still denied today, as is also the fact that the members of the Knights Templar at that time still knew from old traditions that Emmanuel's mother was a strongly brownish North African, and Joseph was a white man, and therefore Emmanuel was a mixed race, so to speak, and not completely light-skinned. The Knights Templar were an elite military unit that was directly under the direction of the Pope and played a major role during the Crusades. But note, the Knights Templar was founded around 1118 in the then Christian-ruled Kingdom of Jerusalem. The chronicles and falsifications of history that have been written and continue to be written about the truly atrocious things that happened in the Nazi Empire and the lies that are still being spread today, the monstrous crimes against humanity that the SS organization really committed, are somehow falsely claimed or concealed and even glossed over out of absolute ignorance. Especially the whitewashing lies and also all the deceptions, which were wisely not recorded on celluloid as proof of the effective truth, would prove all kinds of terrible inhumanity that a so-called normal human being cannot imagine. They are truly so inhuman that I do not want to say anything more about them out loud, because this would not only be denied by those neo-Nazis anyway, who, along with the righteous of those in power, are currently squatting in the German government as a neo-Nazi pack and supplying weapons, ammunition and money to Zelensky, but also by human beings in general, because they could not even imagine the degenerate cruelty in their worst nightmares. However, the nightmares and atrocities of humanity also continue as a reality in the world and happen without being able to be stopped. Just think of this warmonger Zelensky, who is begging the world over for weapons, ammunition, and money, and who, thanks to all the donations from the neo-Nazi pack, is continuing the war in Ukraine on behalf of America, which cannot be ended. So the righteous in the government and the part of the people, as is also the case in Switzerland, who really and honestly want peace, freedom and neutrality have no chance of these high values becoming reality. The miscreants are not only traitors to their country, but also traitors to peace, freedom, and neutrality, and do not belong in government, not only in Germany, but also in Switzerland and in any other country, because such rabble will only lead a people into misery and lack of freedom, discord, and ultimately into war and ruin. And the fact that Switzerland also delivers money in the millions and billions to such figures as Zelensky, because it is supposed to serve as development aid for the country and its people, but from which the heads of government enrich themselves, which is of course vehemently denied, knocks the bottom out of all barrels. And this is particularly the case because the heads of government, also in Switzerland, squander a lot of taxpayers' money on this and that foreign country, because they want to play the good child card, gain prestige and look like good human beings. But the fact that those responsible in the government, as well as the operators of the so-called aid organizations, who, as far as I know, are legally allowed to collect around 40% of their begging income as distribution money, etc., let those human beings in their own country practically die miserably who urgently need to be helped and supported with money so that they can live right and have everything they need to do so, is completely ignored. Millions and billions of taxpayers' money are donated abroad, while in our own country many human beings are living in poverty, and many are dying instead of being helped and not having to languish in poverty. And this in a country like Switzerland, which is bursting with wealth, but only respects those in society who pay high taxes, but exploits those who do not have enough money to live on with taxes and lets them die, while vast sums in the millions or even billions are transported abroad under the sleazy guise of alleged development aid to make a good child out of them. An effective fact, but one that is vehemently denied and denied by the guilty, just as the blue-eyed among the people also see and judge the whole thing in the light of religious or secular faith, who believe that everything is right and everything is in order. This is because it cannot be that so much deceit and fraud dominates the world, and it cannot be that every taxpayer is simply being shamefully ripped off and senselessly exploited. Well, in the heat of the moment I strayed a little from the actual topic, so let us get back to it. If the works of Salvador Dali are scrutinized today in a completely neutral way, then the truth is that he did not engrave his etching plates himself, but had them made by various engravers, just as around 85% of the Dali works in circulation are only forgeries, for which he himself had a hand in distributing them. And if we look at the brothers Grimm, it is fair to say that they never wrote a single fairy tale of their own, but stole everything together and only pimped them. Unfortunately, this is how it was done even before antiquity. And it was done thousands of times over because forgeries of all kinds, which were always about money and prestige, but also about politics, went on and on and on. And that is how it all started around 2,500 years ago, when everything actually began commercially in this wise. It began particularly blatantly around 1,000 years ago. And since then it has continued in such a way that everything has gone on endlessly in this way, and is now also leading into the future, and will probably never come to an end. Nowadays, practically everything is counterfeited worldwide, so nothing is safe from counterfeiters, because the world wants to be deceived, as the Romans have been saying since ancient times, mundus vult decipi. So the world wants to be cheated, and in fact nothing is safe from counterfeiting, not even food, which, if it does not come straight from the garden as a vegetable, is adulterated with all kinds of unhealthy and legally permitted or also unauthorized ingredients, some of which contain chemical toxins that are effectively slightly or severely harmful to health. What I do not want to forget, however, which I already mentioned in the conversation in the kitchen, is that Helvetia, that is to say the later Switzerland, is also affected by these forgeries, and just as badly with regard to the Chronicle, which is not officially talked about. But everything is denied, and the people are hoodwinked, and, of course, everything is denied. Switzerland, which already supported human life around 650,000 years ago, which is of course disputed by experts, was colonized by ancient Celtic tribes from areas in the northern countries of Europe as early as the time of the Romans, very distant descendants of whom still live in German-speaking Switzerland today. That was about 2,100 years ago or so, but long before that and before the Romans, the pre-Celts, if I may say so, were here in the territory of Switzerland. So the Swiss of today could look back on them if they knew, but also on ancestors who were Alemanni, and therefore not only Celtic, as were not only the Helvetii. However, when the Helvetian Celts were here, there lived, history reports, a rich important nobleman named Orgetorix, who swung the helm, which is quite correct, as I said. In Celtic, Orgetorix is translated as King of the Manslayers, who then judged himself about 2065 years ago, as Svath said. Orgetorix, as Svath also said, had been fanatical about making himself king over all of Gaul and conquering it. However, he also explained that he was to be called to account for this by the tribal court, which he was able to evade for a short time, but then saw no way out and committed suicide soon afterwards. I also remember that someone wrote a poem about Orgetorix that I had to learn by heart at school, but I can no longer fully remember it because my memory has been failing since I had the stroke. As a result, I only remember bits and pieces of it, such as the beginning, which goes like this. There stood in the ring on the grassy meadow Helvetia's men from every district, the men of the whole country. They stood together in arms and defense, the mighty club, the pointed spear, each had them at hand. And in the center of the ring of flaming eyes there stood the chieftain Orgetorix. Unfortunately, I do not remember much more, and who wrote the poem was quite a long time ago, and my memory is also gone. But now let us move on to what I want to say about forgeries. There is, for example, a deed of alliance of the Waldstadt from 1291 in Switzerland, which is supposed to prove that this was still made during the Helvetian period, which is a lie, because this deed was only created much later as a forgery. This also applies to Mother Helvetia, who is emblazoned with a shield on the 1 and 2 franc pieces. For example, tell on the 5 franc piece, as the mother of the country and as a representative figure only appeared around the middle of the 1600s. Switzerland calls itself the Swiss Confederation, which basically goes back to the legend of the Rütli Oath and thus to this oath, because this legend is used to lie about the fact that on the 1st of August 1291, Uri, Schwyz, and the Swiss Confederation were founded. This legend is based on the lie that on the 1st of August 1291, Uri, Schwyz and Unterwalden were united on the Rütli by the men Werner Stauffacher of Schwyz, Walter Prince of Uri, and Arnold von Melchthal from Unterwalden, in order to seal the whole thing with a rebellion against the bailiffs by swearing an oath on a mountain meadow, high above Lake Lucerne, on a small clearing called the Rütli. The men are said to have said in their mouths, "We will be one nation of brothers, no hardship or danger will separate us. We want to be free as our fathers were, death rather than live in bondage. Let us trust in the Most High God not to be afraid of the might of human beings." However, another historical source tells us that this event took place around 16 years later, namely on the 8th of November 1307, when the 3 men from Uri, Schwyz, and Unterwalden are said to have sworn the Rütli Oath to the Waldstadt. This is also said to have included the obligation to stand by each other against foreign claims and interference. What really happened was somewhat different, as was also the case with the Battle of Sempach in 1386, when Arnold von Winkelried, the Nidwalden native, is said to have bravely thrown himself into the spears of the enemy, that is to say, the Habsburg Knights of the Duchy of Austria, in order to cut a gap so that the Swiss could achieve victory. Winkelried is said to have shouted magnificently and godly, "Loyal, dear Confederates, take care of my wife and children and remember my family." Heroes are always needed, whether they are real, good or not, but it is not only stupidly misleading the people, such as heroically inventing and elevating Winkelried, so that the people are lied to and deceived and believe in the lie. when the truth is that he, if it was Winklereed, only shouted in rage men might kill the dogs, only to be killed himself a few minutes later by having a spear thrust through his throat. But nobody wants to know this truth because, as usual, an imaginary hero is needed to maintain heroism. So a true Swiss hero was chosen, just as William Tell was also elevated to the status of a national hero, cobbled together by Friedrich Schiller in the Tell Saga, as another fantasy story, as was already the case in the Wieland Saga, or Wieland Saga, which exists in different versions, but whose core plot is the same. In Germanic mythology, the semi-divine figure of a Germanic blacksmith was invented for this heroic saga, who was considered a true artist and was said to come from Gotensitz, which in today's South Tyrol is called Gossensass and can be found in the Fleschertal Valley. In the so-called Song of Voland in the Song Edda, Wieland is called Voland and had two brothers, Schlagfitter and Eagle, the latter of whom was a famous archer and hunter. The latter was forced by the king to shoot an apple from the head of his 3-year-old son, after which Schiller used this saga to create the Swiss saga of the national hero William Tell, whereby this Tell is still haunted by the true story of the origins of Switzerland, which is of course championed by chronicle fanatics as the effective truth. But from my adolescent years onwards I was even subjected to evil violence if I said anything against the lies and deceit and thus the truth. But the saga of the Appleshot appears in other real lore, such as the William of Cloudsley and so on. Well, so early Swedes or something like that migrated a long time ago as a Celtic group Helvetii, with a leader called Orgetorix playing a role, so as I said, there was also a poem written about that. As the Alemanni also retained their language at that time, but the Burgundians adopted the Latin of the occupiers, which is known as Vulgar Latin, and this was spread. There is no standardized language spoken in Switzerland today, but Swiss German with various dialects, as well as High German, French, Italian, and Romansh. Well, forgeries have existed around the world since time immemorial, especially since antiquity, in the last century and also in the 21st century. For example, with regard to the forgery of the contact reports, Hans Glanzmann should be mentioned, as well as Ilse von Jacobi and the W., then doctor, and also the organization, which has since disbanded. But unfortunately the same thing has happened in 5 different countries since then. Again, this Reach alias anyway. As a result, it is very strict that constant checks are made to ensure that no female or male persons shamelessly falsify lies from the contact reports, and even claim that they have contact with you, even though.
Which corresponds to a lie in any case, because except with you, we do not practice any contacts with Earth humans or with any Earth beings of other genus or species.
Of course not, but lies and deception need not be bought by the Earthling who lies and deceives, for they are free. For liars and cheats, their actions are wealth, just as lies and deceit result in might in politics, which is nothing other than the injustice of humanity. All possibilities and only the smallest deviations from the truth, as well as great falsifications and any kind of aberrations, etc., create new conceptual stories. Falsifications, lies and frauds, and thus also the term pseudologia fantastica, just as the term chronic liar and chronic fraudster then also applies to many human beings, because they effectively become such. However, I would like to conclude by saying that neither the FIGU nor I personally will continue to deal with all the insane and confused lying accusations and frauds of Jediah Ramnarine alias Jedi Reach and his sect, which have recently been posted on various forums on the internet. Every person is free to become addicted to all the nonsense, lies, frauds, sectarian megalomania, as well as greed for money and other forms of profiteering. Self-exaltation as the most wise and wisest of all wise men, as well as to the sectarian's pathological aversion to work and his machinations, which are bursting with the art of seduction. From a rational point of view, nothing more can be said for those human beings who are still somewhat capable of reason and their own thoughts as well as of self-decision and self-action, and who are not completely deluded and confused by a belief. There is probably nothing more to say about all the hateful, Slobbering and baseless accusations, lies, and deceptions of Jediah Ramnarine, aka Jedi Reach, for the effective truth is too sublime to have to justify.
That is also not necessary, for the truth speaks for itself and can never be destroyed by the worst lies and deceit.
Yes, and it is said that it is as constant as eternity itself, and this also states that in the future, nature itself will turn against the unreasonableness of human beings, because as I know, it is beginning to defend itself against overpopulation. Consequently, human beings are becoming increasingly lowly intelligent and also more susceptible with regard to diseases. Nature will also strike and attack and reduce the fertility of men, who will inevitably lose their ability in this respect, just as the female sex will also become more infertile in the near future and thus unable to conceive. But here I have received an article that I should show you, and that I do not want to withhold from you.
War Nation USA, the deterrent guiding star of Europe blog from 11.9. 209, author, Lieslott Pfaff, writer Lystel BL.
The following is my response to the assertion by an America fan that the USA must not go under any circumstances and must be and remain the guiding star of Europe. Personally, I can well imagine the world without the USA, that is to say, without this country's perverse power regime. By regime of power, I do not mean the American people, but the ruling and propertied classes in America since its foundation. The writer Gore Vidal, who comes from the U.S. power elite, said in the course of a conversation in June 1999 that the Truman Doctrine of 1947 was a lie. Supposedly, we wanted to help every country achieve good government, freedom, and democracy. But from the beginning, it only served to justify our powerful military establishment. We spend more on armaments than all the states of the Western world put together, and for that, you need good enemies. This doctrine clearly states what the USA has been about since the Second World War: to achieve control over the entire Earth. But the American people resented the role of world policeman. This terrible ambition only torments national leaders. The American does not want to get involved in armed conflicts, but prefers to stay at home, earn a lot of money, and eat his excess weight in peace. The American army is recruited from the poor, white and black alike. This mercenary army is well paid. On the Kosovo War, it takes a huge pack of lies, staged as a disinformation campaign by the CIA, to keep crises constantly simmering. Television makes things easier. It provides wonderful images of blonde, blue-eyed human beings being tortured, driven from their villages and slaughtered. This creates a wonderfully sentimental climate. After the fall of this world empire, the magnificent landscapes, wildlife and plants, redwoods, etc., will fortunately continue to exist, perhaps also a few Indians, Latinos, and whites who have sworn themselves to a sensible life. However, a nation that has always been expansionist and strives for global expansion can never be a guiding star for Europe. Ancient Rome, on the other hand, was child's play, but also had to decline. See below: USA and Europe, Mars and Venus. The decline will certainly be very slow, unfortunately. This is to be feared, at the expense of the poorest in the country. They are already on the decline. Those who have the necessary money will move to other countries. This has always been the case in the history of humanity. The USA has always been a warlike nation. Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Vietnam War, etc., and also seems to remain so under the savior, Barack Obama, reinforcement of the U.S. Army in Afghanistan, establishment of 14 new Army bases in Colombia, etc. Obama's vision of a nuclear-free future. Obama announced in Prague, "We must stand together for the right of all human beings everywhere to live freely and without fear in the 21st century." As the only nuclear power to have used this nuclear weapon, the atomic bomb, the United States has a moral obligation to act. At the same time, the U.S. President emphasized that the USA would retain its nuclear potential for as long as other states also had nuclear weapons. The process would probably take several decades. But we must insist and say, yes, we can. LP, a nice slogan, but what does it mean? What the presidents of the Czech Republic and Poland heard Obama's clear commitment to George W. Bush's missile defense plans in both countries. As long as there is Iran and other threats, we will also need such missile defense systems, Obama confessed. The head of the Czech government, Mirek Topolánek, was delighted. Obama's speech made it unmistakably clear that the missile defense project will not be terminated. Source Mittelland Zeitung, the 6th of April, 2009. USA and Europe. Mars and Venus. Robert Kagan, U.S. author and neo-cons thinker Robert Kagan. The Americans are from Mars, the Europeans are from Venus. Asterisk. The neoconservatives have played a decisive role in shaping the Bush administration's foreign policy. Kagan is convinced that America and Europe are fundamentally different due to their historical experience and have very different ideas about the use of military force or the role of international institutions and international law. According to Kagan, the USA has been expansionist since the first pilgrims set foot on the continent. The urge to interfere in foreign affairs is part of America's DNA. Since 1776, America has been a revolutionary might that strives for change. Liberalism and individualism served as legitimization for westward expansion and later global expansion. America was a dangerous nation from the very beginning, according to Kagan. Instead of geoeconomics, today geopolitics is important again, instead of global internal politics, the concert of might as in the 19th century. LP, this country is supposed to be the guiding star of Europe? No, thank you. Comments asterisk. I would rather be a descendant of Venus than Mars. But the viewpoint, USA as the guiding star of Europe, naturally fits perfectly into the prevailing media mainstream. No journalist has trouble being successful with that. Or as Kurt Tucholsky put it, nothing is more difficult than being in open opposition to your time and saying, no.
What can I say to that? The whole thing corresponds to what actually is.
What just is, that is the way it is. But Occam emailed me something else that I think I should also show you.
Source Facebook. Achim Wolf, Germany.
The whole thing corresponds to what Earth humans should effectively think about thoroughly. Then it would come to the point where, under normal circumstances, the words would really be grasped and understood, and human beings would get away from their illusory thinking, and no longer wage wars such as those currently claiming tens of thousands of lives in the Middle East and Ukraine.
War is always violence, and violence always brings further violence. But the Earthling does not want to understand this, and he also does not understand that he should turn to non-violence, but this requires courage and strength. And that the violence he uses constantly and at every opportunity never brings peace and freedom, but only further violence is something he does not want to and cannot understand in his lack of understanding. And this is very often due to the fact that he does not give it much thought, but instead indulges in brooding and illusory thoughts and is not prepared to think consciously about everything, preferring instead to believe. So he simply lets everything run and happen in indifference, as it happens directly and at the moment, in the future, or even in the distant future. Regardless of the fact that this very often results in discord, strife, gavolt, murder and manslaughter, and even war and terror with destruction and annihilation. Moreover, this is always associated with the military if the unpeacefulness relates to a state. But the military is in any case a murderous society that only carries out its bloody trade with murder. Gavolt, destruction and annihilation, and thus never creates peace or defends it with murders and other malignities. Armed neutrality, which is supposed to apply to self-defense, is also a lie and a deception, because armed neutrality is absolutely null and void if it is intended for self-defense with weapons. A true neutrality must not be armed and consequently must not have a military that proclaims a military intervention of self-defense with weapons, because a true state neutrality is based on and guarantees not only absolute impartiality and non-interference in any affairs of foreign states, but also an all-encompassing non-violence. However, this requires true trust in it, as well as the courage and strength of human beings, in order to truly live and cultivate it, to consciously and faithfully practice it, and to be absolutely clear that violence to the contrary always brings counter-violence. Consequently, Gavolt only brings violence, revenge and retaliation, murder, torture, manslaughter, destruction, rape, annihilation, and even extermination, but never effective peace. Armed neutrality, as Switzerland has, is being made a pig of by traitors to the country, with sanctions being adopted by the EU dictatorship and imposed on a foreign country, in this case, Russia. This raises the question of what kind of Swiss this is. Who practices such things? Hardly someone who really effectively honors, appreciates and values the fatherland, and does not know what neutrality and the preservation of freedom and peace, as well as the protection of life really is. In other words, a bad-minded human being who only goes along as a bad creature with a depraved mindset and acts completely, irresponsibly and treacherously, even if this human being is an elected member of the government and does not even have a guilty conscience or the decency to apologize openly and in a repentant manner to the people who have been shamefully betrayed and whose homeland has been betrayed. That is what I think, and also that such traitors to the country are not worthy of Swiss citizenship.
You speak plainly, which does not please the guilty person and their supporters.
I realize that, but those who advocate and support the treasonous actions of this rotten, treasonous person in any wise are no better than this person himself, and like those who flirt with the EU dictatorship and the NATO murderous organization and aspire to its personality. This is also treason, because it would also make a mockery of the neutrality of the fatherland and thereby destroy the freedom and peace of Switzerland and thus its entire population.
That is probably true, but you will win enemies with your words, because there will probably be negators who are not of a mindset in accordance with the truth and are indulgent and trivializing of every falsehood and injustice and are opposed to the truth in this respect.
I know that, but that is wrong, because either right and truth prevail, whereby order, peace, freedom, and righteousness are given, or chaos prevails and thus wrong, untruth, unpeace, unfreedom, unrighteousness, and mismanagement.
Effectively, that is so.
Exactly, but look here, I have received another article to show you. However, I did not get a picture of it, and I'm also not willing to say anything about it myself. But read it for yourself.
The Swiss flag also flies at the UN headquarters in Geneva. Copyright Viverina Deposit Photos.
The Neutrality Initiative, as an opportunity For a course correction, Verena Tobler, a 21.4. 2024 Switzerland should look after the UN, and not NATO. A radical departure from neoliberal paradoxes is needed. Verena Tobler, copyright symbol ZVG.
Read the mediator, sociologist and ethnologist Verena Tobler is an expert on migration and intercultural coexistence. She is one of the system-critical left-wingers and Greens who support the Neutrality Initiative. George Hassler, security and military expert at the NZC, claimed on 12.4. 24 that the Neutrality Initiative combines the SVP's revisionist longing for the 19th century with left-wing anti-NATO rhetoric. However, to summarize briefly, the initiative calls for 4 things. 1. Switzerland retains its defense army in case it is attacked. 2. Our country is prohibited from joining a war alliance, in plain language, NATO. 3. Switzerland supports the sanctions of the UN, the most important body in the global world of states. 4. It uses its neutrality to mediate and prevent or resolve conflicts. The 3 innovations are important for the system-critical left and the Greens. Switzerland will not ally itself with NATO, the aggressive organization that has been asserting Western supremacy for 75 years. Instead, our country will orientate itself towards the UN in future, opening itself up to the problems and interests of the global world of states. And if human beings are to have a future on our planet, peace work will become a duty. In short, the Neutrality Initiative allows us to change course. The master narrative of modernity is telling the story of the shipwreck in a few lines. Since the 16th century, Europe and its offshoots USA, Canada and Australia have built up a superior power apparatus in terms of energy, technology, finance, law and organization. Western rule was based on colonization, slavery, exploitation, and oppression. Despite formal decolonization, the former masters retained many advantages that today all Western states are modern, that is to say monetarily organized. Thanks to the massive concentration of capital, the population enjoys an above-average standard of living and consumption. In Western welfare states, this includes adequate medical care, a satisfactory education system and all the insurance schemes that make life easier for the elderly, disabled, unemployed, surviving dependents and the sick, all monetary-based institutions. But all these achievements are only possible where the majority of the population has formal gainful employment. This is a glaring shortcoming as economic development and individual freedoms were once promised to all those who participated in liberal global economies. But only money might make individuals free in the Western sense. So the West has led itself and what it treats as the rest of the world into a threefold catastrophe. 1. Huge unequal development. The comparative cost advantages promised by free trade are a fairy tale in that the benefits for economically weaker states and their enterprises are far less than for those with a superior power apparatus. This is where structurally weak states remain stuck in the poverty trap. Many countries in Asia were able to escape this trap. They already had a well-structured state tradition before colonialism, an official bureaucracy with writing, money, accounting, tax levies based on professional division of labor and markets. These states only opened their markets once they were sufficiently competitive. The opposite is true for the countries of Africa, especially those south of the Sahara, the structurally weak states. They are not able to cope with global competition. They were vertically integrated, a priori aligned with the interests of Western countries and their corporations, often in cooperation with the respective African governments, the gateway for corruption. Such imbalances always trigger migratory movements, first from the countryside to the city, today from south to north. 2. Global warming and threatened biodiversity. The liberal or neoliberal global economy has brought global warming and declining biodiversity to our planet. Although we have long known that the Western lifestyle is not globalizable, we cling to it. In fact, we are so arrogant that we measure the rest of the world against our Eurocentric values and legal concepts and our overconsumption. 3. Was to maintain dominance. The USA and its extended arm in NATO have been waging open wars for decades, often in violation of international law, in order to maintain the West's dominance by any means necessary. Not only in Yugoslavia and against Afghanistan. The USA has also intervened in wars elsewhere, often with the support of its allies. This is because the imperial superpower is determined to secure its monopolistic world order and its hegemonic access to resources in Iraq, Libya, Syria, Ukraine, and Russia. And what has it achieved? In addition to economic immigration, Europe has been confronted with hundreds of thousands of refugees for decades. In the countries under attack, there is usually ongoing chaos. War is not the solution to either the unequal development or the conditions on the ground. In 2022, the former British Foreign Secretary Liz Truss bluntly summarized the reason why Western countries support the USA as follows: "We need an economic NATO that defends our standard of living." Almost all European countries are now pushing into NATO. A third world war is looming. In Switzerland, Viola Amherd and Ignazio Casas are supporting this cause uncritically and compliantly. Fueled by our mainstream media, NZZ, Teddy Zanziger, and SRF no longer provide comprehensive and all-round information. On the one hand, the important information is often withheld. For example, the fact that the war in Ukraine began back in 2014 is now confirmed by NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg. Or that in March 2022, the British prohibited Ukraine from working out a peace treaty with Russia. On the other hand, the three media outlets are valiantly promoting a Manichaean view of the world as supposedly the good guys are fighting the bad guys, the echo of George W. Bush's devastating war against the axis of evil. These wars are always legitimized with Western values, an absurd undertaking. I will come back to this at the end. Leftists and Greens who are critical of the system do not go along with this cause. It leads straight into the abyss. The system of limitless economic growth capitalism is per se oriented towards growth. In Switzerland, all major parties are also focused on constant and limitless economic growth, from the SP to the SVP. This is despite the fact that many resources are finite and the enormous energy consumption required to access global resources is threatening the diversity of life on our planet. The climate and oceans are warming and the biosphere is being destroyed. And while one part of humanity insists on unlimited access to global resources, the other part has less and less at its disposal. This is why human beings are migrating from poor regions to Switzerland or the USA to territorial societies that utilize 3 or 6 planets respectively. This systemically unbalanced growth economy leads to a vicious circle. This can be seen in the EU's political system and in that of Switzerland in the form of paradoxical dead ends. Migration is constantly deepening the systemic imbalances. It is primarily the educated, the capable, and the young who leave poor countries, a loss that makes development difficult, if not impossible, for poor countries. In Switzerland, however, immigration increases the number of natives who suffer from immigration. Their wages remain low or fall, housing is becoming scarce and steadily more expensive. And because they live in neighborhoods filled with poor and less educated immigrants, there are often cultural clashes. This is where many locals are grumbling that they are against immigration, even denigrating immigrants. In France, the disadvantaged section backs the Rassemblement National. In Germany, the AfD, and in Switzerland, the SVP. But what the supporters of the right-wing nationalist parties do not want is to reduce the imbalances between the rich and poor parts of the world. As a result, the trend towards immigration there and immigration here will continue. What a paradox. Left-wing solidarity and development aid do not lead to the necessary equalization. Either the left-wing Green Party is in favor of individuals who leave the poor world for the rich North. However, it ignores the fact that this also increases structural imbalances within the countries of origin and in the international system. Migration from the south and overconsumption in the north will continue. Nota bene, with all the advantages that immigration in Switzerland brings for the better educated, they are in demand professionally, as teachers, as doctors, as integration officers. And they can afford a cleaner or a nanny. These educated classes like to celebrate multiculturalism. They point out that immigrants send a lot of money home to improve the consumption opportunities of their loved ones. Although this family solidarity creates privileges, it slows down the economic and social changes which are urgently needed in a poor country that are essential for a state to be able to finance suprafamilial solidarity institutions, organize itself democratically, and be controlled from below. Nevertheless, the SP is in favor of redistribution in Switzerland. In doing so, it is pursuing a party policy that is supported by many naturalized immigrants and women. But this policy, corporate initiative or not, is also a paradox. It is only possible as long as Switzerland can maintain its superior ability to accumulate capital worldwide. This in turn brings further immigration, and we completely lose sight of the fundamental changes to economic rules without which development aid efforts will also ultimately be ineffective. The Greens Party program is particularly paradoxical. Switzerland's population growth has been one of the highest in Europe for 7 decades and makes a mockery of the idea of biodiversity. Switzerland, in a country full of houses, roads, and railway tracks, was a recent newspaper headline. At the same time, the Greens accuse local farmers of intensifying their production on the rapidly dwindling agricultural land. But this is part of the logic of our profit-oriented economic system. If our farmers become too expensive, they become dispensable. Mrs. Another point that has not been considered is that water and electricity are also not available without limits. Will the Greens only wake up when all the soil is sealed, the Alps are covered with solar panels, and water becomes scarce? The attitude of the Liberals is just as paradoxical as that of the current center ground. They cling unconditionally to limitless further growth and backwards that are waged in the name of democracy, human rights, and individual freedoms. Yet both wars and free trade primarily serve to maintain the advantages of the neoliberal global economy. It is emphasized that migration is necessary. However, the correct ones should come the skilled labor and scientists from poor countries, of which there are few anyway. The brain drain is shamelessly promoted. In plain language, we are dealing with development aid from below, the poorest are financing the richest. So what is inevitable happens. The uneducated and unwanted also arrive en masse, a dilemma that liberalism cannot solve. Critics of the system are trying to break this vicious circle soberly and without rancor. So now back to the Western community of values, the prime example of system blindness. In 2021, 4.1 billion human beings had no monetary security. This means that for half of humanity, their biological children were the only form of old-age insurance. And because the elderly are dependent on the support of their physiological children, homosexuality, for example, is often frowned upon in poor countries, also for rational reasons. These are ideas of order that contradict human rights and are incompatible with the expectations of the LGBTQ* community and many feminists. However, the reasons for this are economic, due to global imbalances, the low number of formal gainful employment opportunities, and directly linked to this, the lack of interfamilial solidarity institutions. Premonetary solidarity institutions are the most important reason why binding kinship, generational and gender roles are maintained in the poor part of the world. All three are legitimized and stabilized by traditional or religious beliefs, just as they used to be here. In the poor country, it is not state institutions but religious institutions, churches, mosques, temples, that provide the interfamily balance, as was the case here in the past. But why do we fail to realize that there is no society without binding rules? Anyone who compares the primary rules that are binding there with the secondary rules that are binding in this country will ask how far the hierarchically organized primary roles in the poor world are surpassed by the hierarchy that applies to our professional and employment roles. The Neutrality Initiative allows Switzerland to make an urgently needed course correction. The Neutrality Initiative requires our country to be open to the world, to work towards peace and balance, and therefore to take steps towards social and ecological sustainability. Athol, the follow-up publication to Limits to Growth, emphasizes that global warming and declining biodiversity can only be halted if inequality is reduced and wars are avoided. The pure opposite of what NATO might currently be doing. The UN is a cumbersome and non-transparent organization. But what is not can, indeed must become. At least if human beings are to have a dignified life worldwide and in all countries in the future. Leftists and Greens who are critical of the system are convinced that it is more feasible and more promising for the future to campaign for a reform of the UN than to bow to the devastating monopolistic claim to power of the USA and its belligerent arm, NATO. We therefore call on all Swiss citizens to support the Neutrality Initiative. Back to Mr. Hassler and his NZZ. Anyone who is enthusiastic about war and operates with Manichaean worldviews and pretends that the good guys are fighting the bad guys in Ukraine and Israel is leading Switzerland into the abyss. What is more, camp thinking stultifies. Our world is not only unequal but also highly complex. The system of liberal and neoliberal global economics has ensured this a water challenge. In order to solve the problems we face, we need to be more intelligent about complexity and tolerant of ambiguity. Both will be strengthened if we hold informed and fact-based discussions and debates. Footnotes.
Overall, this is a matter for political judgment, which is why I do not want to interfere or also express an opinion on it. I only gave it to you to read because I was asked to, but I think that you...
In the same way as you take note of what is written in this article, but will not express any opinion on it. But now the time is far advanced, and a lot has been said, so I think we will end our conversation for today, and I also have my duty to fulfill.
You are right. In the heat of the moment, I did not look at the hours to see how the time had flown by. There really has been a lot of talking, which I think I need Bermunda's help to recall and write down reasonably quickly. It is probably good if I start as soon as you are gone so that I can get on with it. I have arranged to meet Michael for a conversation in the afternoon, but I want to limit the time so that I can continue to retrieve and write down the conversation. So please let Bermunda know because I really need her help.
She will probably be able to because she can trade off her duty with Florina or Anjana.
That would be really good, because that way the contact report could be retrieved and written down enough by tomorrow evening that I can give it to Bernadette to proofread.
It is also not that urgent now, but I will inform Bermunda. Then I will go now and endeavor to get you the committee's important answer as soon as possible. Goodbye, dear friend, Edward.
Then also goodbye, Ptah, dear friend.